Chicago, Illinois. The United Center, February 14, 1993. Sunday afternoon, Valentine's Day. The arena holds 21,511 seats, and every single one of them is filled. Not because of a scheduled game, not because of a playoff matchup, because of a phone call made 3 days ago that somehow leaked to every sports radio station, every newspaper, every barbershop and sports bar from Chicago to Boston. Larry Bird called out Michael Jordan. Not through a press release, not through an agent. Larry Bird picked up the phone, called the Chicago Bulls front office directly, and left a message that was simple, direct, and absolutely devastating in its confidence. Tell Jordan I want to know who the real king is. Tell him to meet me on the court, one-on-one. No cameras, no referees, no rules, just basketball, just truth. The message reached Jordan on a Thursday morning. He was in the middle of a film session with his coaching staff, breaking down defensive schemes for an upcoming game against the New York Knicks. One of the team assistants walked in, visibly nervous, and handed Jordan a folded piece of paper. Jordan read it once. Then he read it again. Then he set the paper down on the table very carefully, the way a man sets down something fragile, something that requires respect. He looked at his coaching staff. He looked at the film frozen on the screen. He looked at the piece of paper one more time. Then Michael Jordan smiled. Not the smile he gave to cameras, not the commercial smile, the endorsement smile, the smile that sold sneakers and sports drinks to an entire generation. This was something different. This was the smile of a man who has been waiting for a specific conversation for a very long time. Set it up, he said. Whatever Bird wants, give it to him. The history between these two men runs deeper than most people understand. Larry Bird and Michael Jordan exist in a complicated relationship that the sports media has never fully captured. Bird was the dominant force of the 1980s, the man who rebuilt the Boston Celtics into a dynasty, who won 3 consecutive MVP awards, who was so fundamentally sound in his understanding of basketball that coaches used his game film as teaching material for decades. He was the thinking man's player, the craftsman, the architect who built his game on angles and intelligence rather than athleticism. Jordan was something else entirely. Jordan was the future arriving before anyone was ready for it. When he entered the league in 1984, Bird watched him with the careful attention of a master craftsman observing a new technology that threatens to make his tools obsolete. Bird respected Jordan. He said publicly, after watching Jordan score 63 points against his Celtics in a 1986 playoff game, that God disguised himself as Michael Jordan and came to play basketball. That quote became legendary. Bird meant every word of it. But respect and acceptance are different things. Bird had spent his entire career proving that intelligence could defeat athleticism, that fundamentals could overcome raw talent, that a white kid from French Lick, Indiana, who couldn't jump particularly high and couldn't run particularly fast, could become the greatest player of his generation through sheer understanding of the game. His entire identity was built on that proof. And now Jordan was threatening to rewrite the story. Jordan was making people forget that basketball had ever been played any other way. Jordan was becoming the standard against which all future players would be measured. Bird felt it happening. He felt the narrative shifting. He felt his legacy being quietly reclassified from greatest to second greatest, from king to former king. Larry Bird was 36 years old in February of 1993. His back had been deteriorating for years. The result of a construction job he worked as a young man that left permanent damage in his spine. He had played through pain that would have ended most careers. He had won championships, scoring titles, defensive awards, and the respect of every serious basketball mind in the world. He had retired from playing just the previous year, in 1992, stepping away from the game that had defined his entire existence. But he had not made peace with the question that followed him into retirement, that appeared in every interview, that hung in the air whenever his name was mentioned alongside Jordan's. Who was better? Who was the real king? Bird decided he needed an answer. Not a media answer, not a statistical answer, not an argument settled by columnists and analysts who had never played at that level. A real answer, a basketball answer, one-on-one, on a court, with nobody watching except people who understood exactly what they were seeing. The logistics came together with surprising speed. The United Center was available on Sunday afternoon. Both men agreed to keep it private, but private in the world of professional basketball means approximately 250 people somehow receive invitations. Former players, coaches, team executives, A handful of journalists who swore on their careers they would not publish anything without explicit permission. The kind of crowd that understands the weight of what they are witnessing. Bird arrived first. He walked into the arena wearing a simple white t-shirt and basketball shorts, carrying his own sneakers in a bag. No entourage, no handlers, no physical therapist hovering nearby, despite the fact that his back required daily treatment just to function. He laced up his shoes at the baseline, stood up slowly, and began shooting free throws with the methodical precision that had defined his entire career. One after another, barely moving his feet, barely changing his expression, just sending the ball through the net with the quiet confidence of a man who has performed this action approximately 10 million times. The crowd that had gathered watched him in silence. Even people who had seen Bird play hundreds of times felt something watching him now. There was something almost sacred about it. A retired legend, a man whose body had been broken by the game he loved, standing alone on a basketball court doing the thing he was born to do. Jordan arrived 20 minutes later. He walked in wearing black practice gear, and the energy in the arena shifted immediately. This is the thing about Jordan that statistics cannot capture and highlight reels only partially convey. His presence changes the atmosphere of a room. Not because of his size, he is 6'6", impressive but not overwhelming. Not because of his physical appearance, though he is built with the kind of functional musculature that looks designed rather than developed. It is something else. Something in the way he carries himself, in the absolute certainty of his movement, in the sense that he is always, in every moment, completely aware of exactly where he is and exactly what he is capable of. He spotted Bird shooting free throws and stopped walking. He watched for a moment. Then he walked to the other end of the court and began his own warm-up, moving through a series of footwork drills with the focused intensity of a man preparing for a championship game rather than a Sunday afternoon conversation. The two men warmed up at opposite ends of the court for 15 minutes without speaking. The crowd watched both of them simultaneously, heads turning back and forth like spectators at a tennis match, trying to absorb everything. Bird's warm-up was economical, precise, every movement purposeful. Jordan's warm-up was fluid, almost hypnotic, a continuous flow of motion that made the basketball seem like an extension of his body rather than a separate object. They stood facing each other, and the size difference was immediately apparent. Jordan had 4 inches and approximately 30 pounds of muscle on Bird. But Bird stood with the posture of a man who has never been intimidated by anyone in his life, who has looked across the court at Magic Johnson and Dominique Wilkins and Kevin McHale and found in each of them not a reason for fear, but a problem to be solved. Bird spoke first. He did not waste time on pleasantries. "People keep asking me who the real king is," Bird said. "I figured we should settle it properly." Jordan looked at him for a long moment. His expression was unreadable, the same mask he wore in playoff games when the pressure was at its absolute maximum. Then he said simply, "Make it to 11. Win by 2. Bird nodded. They shook hands. The crowd pressed closer. What followed over the next 47 minutes was something that the 250 people present would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe accurately. Not because of the score, not because of the outcome, but because of what the game revealed about both men, about basketball itself, about the nature of greatness. Bird's game was immediately apparent in its architecture. Every move he made was connected to every other move, part of a system so deeply internalized that it had become instinct. He set screens for himself that didn't exist, creating angles through pure footwork. He pump-faked Jordan into the air 3 times in the first 5 minutes, drawing contact that would have been fouls in a real game, then calmly making the shot anyway. He talked constantly, not trash talk exactly, more like a running commentary on what was happening, on what Jordan was doing wrong, on what Bird was about to do next. It was psychological warfare disguised as basketball analysis. "You're cheating left," Bird told Jordan after hitting a mid-range jumper from the elbow. "You've been doing it since 1988. I've been watching film on you for 9 years. Every time you're tired, you cheat left." Jordan said nothing. He caught the inbound pass and drove right, directly into Bird's chest, drawing contact, absorbing it, finishing through it anyway. The ball rattled in. Bird smiled. "That's what I thought," he said. The game was tied at 5 when something shifted. It happened on a single possession, a moment so brief that several people in the crowd missed it entirely. Jordan caught the ball at the top of the key, 15 feet from the basket. Bird came to contest, moving with the careful deliberateness of a man managing his back, positioning himself to take away the driving lane. Jordan pump-faked, Bird didn't move. Jordan pump-faked again. Bird didn't move. They stood there for a full 3 seconds, Jordan holding the ball, Bird watching him with the patient attention of a chess player who has already seen 12 moves ahead. Then Jordan did something nobody expected. He passed. Not to a teammate. There were no teammates. He simply held the ball out toward Bird in a gesture that was half offer and half acknowledgement. Bird looked at the ball. He looked at Jordan. He understood immediately what was being communicated. Jordan was telling him, "I see what you're doing. I see the whole game you're playing. I see the psychology, the angles, the film study, the intelligence. I see all of it. And I'm telling you that I see it." Bird took the ball. He dribbled once, twice, then pulled up and hit a jump shot from exactly the spot Jordan had been standing. Nothing but net. "That's the best thing you've ever done," Bird said quietly, and for the first time, there was something in his voice that wasn't competition, something that sounded almost like relief. Jordan scored the next 4 points without saying a word. The game reached 10-9, Jordan leading, with Bird needing to score twice to win. The crowd had gone completely silent. Not the polite silence of people being respectful. The absolute silence of people who are witnessing something they do not have adequate language to describe. Bird got the ball at the 3-point line. His back was visibly bothering him now, the way he shifted his weight, the slight hesitation before each movement. Jordan saw it. Everyone saw it. And Jordan did something that nobody in that arena expected. He stepped back. He gave Bird space. Not the space of a defender who has been beaten, but the deliberate space of a man making a choice. He was giving Bird room to shoot without contest. He was giving him the chance to tie the game on his own terms. The arena held its breath. Bird looked at the open space Jordan had created. He looked at Jordan. He understood what was being offered, and he understood exactly why it was being offered. Jordan wasn't giving him charity. Jordan was giving him respect. Jordan was saying, "You have earned the right to take this shot without me in your face. You have earned the right to let your skill decide this, not my defense." Bird shot the ball. It hit the back of the rim and bounced out. Jordan caught the rebound. He held the ball for a moment, looking at Bird. Then he walked to the free throw line, set the ball down on the floor, and sat down beside it. Bird walked over and sat down across from him. Two of the greatest basketball players in history, sitting on the floor of the United Center, catching their breath. The crowd didn't move. Nobody spoke. Jordan picked up the ball and held it between his hands, turning it slowly. "You know what the difference is?" he said finally. His voice was quiet, meant for Bird alone, but in the silence of the arena it carried to the first several rows. Bird waited. "You built something that lasts forever," Jordan continued. "Everything you did, the way you played, it's in the game permanently. Every coach teaches it. Every player learns from it. You changed what basketball is." He paused. "I'm just trying to be the best version of what you already proved was possible." Bird was quiet for a long time. The arena was so silent that people could hear the ventilation system running somewhere above the rafters. Then Bird said, "You're better than me." He said it simply, without drama, without qualification, not as a concession or a defeat. As a statement of fact from a man who has spent his entire life being honest about basketball, who has never allowed ego to distort his understanding of the game he loves. Jordan shook his head slowly. "You're the reason I knew what better looked like." They sat on the floor for another few minutes, talking quietly, the conversation private now, the crowd understanding instinctively that what was being said between them was not meant to be heard. Then they both stood up. Bird's back made the process slow and painful, and Jordan waited without comment, without offering help, understanding that Bird would not want help, and that offering it would be a different kind of disrespect. They shook hands at center court. Not the brief handshake of competitors at the end of a game. A long, firm handshake, the kind that communicates things that words cannot. Bird walked off the court first. He didn't look back. He walked through the tunnel and disappeared into the corridor beyond, and the sound of his footsteps faded until there was nothing. Jordan stood alone at center court for a moment. He looked at the basket at one end, then at the basket at the other end. He picked up the basketball from where it had been sitting at the free throw line. He walked to the three-point line, the exact spot where Bird had taken his final shot, and he stood there for a long moment. Then he shot the ball. It went through the net without touching the rim. He walked off the court without looking at the crowd, without acknowledging the silence that followed him, without giving anyone the performance they might have expected. Just a man who had finished a conversation that needed to happen, walking toward whatever came next. The 250 people in that arena left without speaking much to each other. There was very little to say. They had witnessed something that existed outside the normal categories of sports, outside wins and losses and statistics and championships. They had watched two men who had dedicated their entire lives to the same pursuit meet each other at the absolute edge of what they were capable of and find there, at that edge, not rivalry but recognition. The story leaked, of course. These things always do. Sports journalists wrote about it with varying degrees of accuracy. Some claimed Jordan dominated completely. Some claimed Bird proved he still had it. Some dismissed the entire thing as a publicity stunt, a friendly workout dressed up as something more significant. The people who were there knew better. They knew that the final score was 11-9. They knew that Jordan won. They knew that Bird took the last shot and missed. But they also knew that none of those facts captured what actually happened in that arena on a Sunday afternoon in February. What happened was that two kings met on a court and discovered that the question of who was greater was the wrong question entirely. The right question, the one that basketball itself was always asking, was not who was better, but what was possible. What could a human being achieve if they devoted everything to understanding a single pursuit? What heights could be reached if talent and intelligence and obsession and sacrifice were combined and directed toward one goal? Bird answered that question one way. Jordan answered it another way. And in the space between their answers, in the conversation they had sitting on the floor of the United Center, with the ball between them, something true was established. Something that didn't need cameras or documentation or official verification. Greatness recognizes greatness, not as a threat, not as competition, as confirmation, as proof that the pursuit was worth everything it cost. In the years that followed, whenever Jordan was asked about the greatest players he ever faced, he gave the expected answers. He talked about Isaiah Thomas and the Bad Boy Pistons. He talked about Clyde Drexler in the finals. He talked about the challenges of facing elite defenders and physical teams and the grinding pressure of playoff basketball. But in private, in quiet conversations with people he trusted, Jordan told a different story. He talked about a Sunday afternoon in February. He talked about a man with a broken back who still understood basketball better than almost anyone alive. He talked about a pump fake that didn't work and a pass that said more than any words could. And he talked about a shot that missed and what it meant that Bird took it anyway. Because that was the thing about Larry Bird that Jordan understood completely and that the public never fully grasped. Bird didn't take that final shot because he thought he would make it. He took it because taking it was the honest thing to do. Because backing down from the moment would have been a lie. And Larry Bird had never told a lie on a basketball court in his entire life. Jordan won the game, but he spent the rest of his career trying to play with that kind of honesty. The king doesn't always wear the crown. Sometimes the king is the man who teaches you what the crown is worth. And sometimes the greatest thing a champion can do is sit down on the floor, hold the ball between his hands, and tell the truth.